Revelation 2136. From the 1st of November 1941. Man can do nothing without divine grace. The human being becomes aware of the lack of strength as soon as he is a believer, for then he recognizes himself as a weak creature without God's grace. Consequently, a believing person does not need to be particularly reproached for his own weakness, for he will rarely consider himself capable of reaching God by his own strength. The believing person sees in God the most sublime and perfect being and is aware of his lowliness and weakness. He will therefore always ask God for the strength for his earthly life, for the ascent upwards. He will appeal to God for grace because he knows that he cannot ascend without divine grace. However, if a person lacks faith, he does not see himself as a powerless creature. Rather, he is firmly convinced that it is up to him alone to achieve what he sets out to do, be it earthly or spiritual success. For the most part he only strives for earthly success, and spiritual striving is unimportant to him. For him, however, it is downright dangerous if a spiritual success is only justified by a grant of grace. For since he regards himself as powerful, he has no doubts that he would be incapable of shaping himself according to God's will, and therefore makes his spiritual maturing dependent on whether God has chosen him, that is, has granted him his grace, thus has destined him for beatitude. And thus he switches off his free will, which lets him ask for grace. He has no profound faith and therefore cannot and will not believe this teaching when his lack of strength is held up to him. But on the other hand, he waits for divine grace which takes hold of him without his intervention, if this is divine will. The right faith lets the human being pray in the right way, full of humility and submission to God's will, yet it is always his own will which prompts him to pray, whereas the unbelieving person does not become active himself but waits for what he should request, that is, request from God. And this attitude can be the result of the fact that the human being is taught that he is unable to do anything without the divine grant of grace and therefore does nothing in order to become worthy of this grace. The teaching that the human being is incapable of doing anything of his own strength does not determine him to appeal for the granting of strength but instead determines him to wait idly, and it is therefore better to merely reproach him for the weakness of his will so that he will endeavor to remedy this weakness and then struggle in prayer to strengthen his will. For the strength can be given to him by God, but the will cannot be compulsorily stimulated into action. He has to strive towards God of his own accord, then he will also receive divine grace and recognize his weakness towards the eternal deity. Amen.